Welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I'm your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is Mark Erickson. And Mark is a family law attorney whose firm is located in Campbell, California. He graduated with a JD from Santa Clara University School of Law in 1979. He was admitted to the California State Bar and U.S. District Court, Northern District of California in 1979, and after working for another attorney, mostly in the area of civil and business litigation from 1979 through 1984, he founded his own law firm in 1985. He became a certified family law specialist by the Board of Legal Specialization of the State Bar of California in 1987. I got that all out in one sentence. He has lectured and presented seminars for many groups, including as a teaching assistant and guest lecturer at the Santa Clara University School of Law. Mark has 2 adult sons, and one of them is now working with him as a lawyer in his law firm, which is pretty cool. I have some interviews with Mark in the past about divorce basics, spousal support, child custody, and handling a family business and residence in a divorce. Those are posted under past episodes at our website, which is financialinsiderweekly.com. Mark, thanks for joining me today.
Nice to be here.
Today, Mark and I are going to be talking about how to choose a good divorce lawyer. So, if you're in the unfortunate situation of thinking about moving ahead with a divorce and you're looking for help, I think you'll find some good information here and help you in that process. And good luck. Okay. Well, gee, Mark, let's say I'm a person that's thinking about getting a divorce, and I'm looking for a divorce lawyer. Won't any lawyer do?
Well, many of us are old enough to remember the old Perry Mason shows, and Perry Mason did just about everything. I think today most lawyers limit their practice and don't take everything that comes in the door. So certainly you'd want to start out by limiting your search to lawyers that actually practice family law. There's certainly still some general practitioners out there that will handle a number of areas of the law, but I think most attorneys that handle family law focus either on it exclusively or it's a major part of their practice.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Will an internet search tell you who the best lawyers that handling divorces are?
Not necessarily. What I've seen is a lot of the older, more experienced attorneys don't even have a website, mm-hmm. and they may be almost invisible on the web, whereas a lot of the younger lawyers may have a lot of coverage on the web, and so if you do an internet search, you may, maybe not completely, but you may generally be finding less experienced attorneys, or you'll be finding attorneys that spend a lot of money to get coverage on the internet because it doesn't come for free. If you want to come up on the first page of Google, you're paying somebody to be there. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're the best attorney because you spent the most money.
Okay. Okay. Well, what about rating services? So there's things like Yelp, where people talk about their experiences with people that they've worked with. Do you think that's pretty helpful?
I think some of the rating services are, particularly if they are based on peer review. Mm-hmm. Now, Yelp is probably not peer review.
No, that's a customer
It's
feedback.
a customer, or it could be another attorney that doesn't like you. You don't really know who's writing those reviews, and at least when I've looked, I've seen a lot of very inexperienced attorneys that have a tremendous number of really good ratings, mm-hmm.
which
may mean they have a lot of friends and relatives. Mm-hmm. I've seen some very good attorneys who've had some poor comments on Yelp, and so it wouldn't be certainly my first or only place to go, although I know a lot of younger people tend to go to Yelp as opposed to some of the more traditional sites like Martindale-Hubbell, which has been reviewing attorneys for, gosh, I'm going to say at least 100 years. Mm-hmm. And it's peer review based, so they survey other attorneys in your community and judges, and they have a rating system that's been around for a long time. So if you find an attorney that's rated AV by Martindale-Hubbell, you know they have what's called a preeminent rating by their peers. There are other services that have popped up on the internet, some of which require the attorneys to actually spend some time contributing to the site. Doesn't necessarily mean they're a better lawyer, but some of those services will rank that attorney higher because they put some time into helping that site develop some of their content. And so I wouldn't necessarily rely on that. I guess maybe overall, if you look at all the sites, you may get a flavor. But again, I think some of the best attorneys may not show up on some of those rating sites.
Well, it sounds like if you were talking about this Martindale-Hubbell, they would probably encompass a wider group of attorneys, maybe even some that don't do an internet presence.
Sure, and Martindale-Hubbell is nationwide, and so a lot of attorneys will use Martindale-Hubbell if, say, they're looking for a highly rated attorney to handle work, say, in New York or somewhere out of the area.
Okay. So we've talked about some of these alternatives. How do you recommend finding a good divorce lawyer?
Well, of course, if you have a referral from a source that you trust, that's always a good starting point. So if you know an attorney who highly recommends another attorney they know, that's a good place to go. In the area of family law, if you know someone who's been through a divorce and they were satisfied with the attorney that represented them, that's probably a good source. I always recommend to people that see me that they talk to at least, say, 2, 3, 4 qualified attorneys. Now, if you don't have recommendations, one place to start would be to look for certified family law specialists. The state bar certifies specialists in a number of areas of the law. Family law is one of them. And if you go to a certified family law specialist, you know they've passed peer review, they've passed a difficult examination, they have some extensive experience requirements and some continuing education requirements. They need to recertify every 5 years, and they can't have any disciplinary problems. So if you go to a certified specialist, you know they're qualified. You may not like them or like their style, but at least you know they're qualified. If you go to other attorneys, it would be helpful if you at least had some recommendations knowing they are qualified. I know some people actually go to court and watch attorneys in action and then interview, try and schedule appointments with attorneys they've actually observed doing good work.
Okay. Yeah, I've sat there a little bit, I guess you could say, as a spectator in different circumstances. Sometimes they weren't such happy ones, like sitting through, a small claims court, waiting for my own case to come up.
Yeah.
Not fun, but anyway, it is interesting and I guess somewhat entertaining sometimes. But I suppose there's a site like for the California State Bar. If you do a Google search or whatever on that, and then maybe you can look under specializations for that to look at who's specialized. And
yeah, and if you want to check out a specific lawyer, you can go to the State Bar site. You can determine whether they have any disciplinary record, and if they're a specialist, the State Bar site will identify them as a specialist in what area they specialize in.
Okay. So what are some of the things that you look for, if you would look for if you were evaluating a family law attorney?
Well, first I definitely start out to make sure they were qualified.
Okay.
And so if I was satisfied they were qualified, then it's a matter of personality, style. I may test them a little bit on strategies for the particular issue in their case. It may depend on the nature and the complexity of the case. Some family law cases are not terribly complicated, and it really maybe not quite as simple as just shuffling some papers and filling them out. But if people have limited assets, no children, short marriage, equal incomes, it should be fairly routine, and so you don't necessarily need a highly qualified, experienced attorney. If you have a complicated case, say a child custody move-away case, a case where the family owns business assets, high-income cases, complicated characterization of assets, are they community or separate property, then I think you want to limit yourself to somebody that's more qualified. And you may test them. You may try and find out some of the answers before you see the attorney, and then see what answers they give, and determine for yourself whether they're giving the right answers.
Mm-hmm. Now, are there some special areas that attorneys focus on that are in the family law area, so like subspecialties under the specialty?
Yes, and I guess when you're setting an appointment, you may want to ask specifically, does this attorney limit their practice to certain areas? For example, there are some very good family law attorneys who won't handle child custody issues, which commonly come up.
Yeah.
So you may not want to hire that person to handle your divorce if you expect there's going to be child custody and visitation problems. There are some good attorneys that limit themselves to dealing with pensions and preparing what we call qualified domestic relations orders. There are a number of attorneys, very good attorneys, that do not want to handle domestic violence issues. And nowadays, domestic violence issues come up very, very commonly in family law cases. So you want to find out in advance, is this attorney willing to take a case that has domestic violence issues?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. So now I'm thinking about going and interviewing some of these people, or with some of these people. Do I have to pay for an initial consultation?
Well, that varies from attorney to attorney, and you certainly want to ask that in advance. And I know when people call my office, they always ask my staff that question. And when they're told they'll pay something for the initial consultation, a lot of people immediately hang up. And I know a lot of attorneys that charge their full normal hourly rate for initial consultation. There are some that charge nothing for an initial consultation, and then quite a few will give some sort of a discounted rate for a limited consult, a half hour, 45 minutes, or an hour. In my practice, I give a discount for 45 minutes, and then I start charging my hourly rate. And from what I hear from clients is there's a big difference between the nature and quality of the initial interviews, and the feedback I get is the freebies tend to not provide a lot of information or give a lot of time. So if you really are interested in getting some information and having a quality interview, it's more likely you're going to want to pay for it.
Okay. What fee arrangements should you expect when you hire a divorce lawyer?
Well, almost all attorneys in family law are going to charge by the hour, unlike, say, personal injury case where you would have what they call a contingency fee. A lot of people will ask, can you take my divorce case on a contingency? But what's the contingency?
Right.
You're going to pay me something extra if we complete your case. So there's some real ethical considerations too that would preclude contingency cases in most family law matters. So generally it's going to be hourly rate, and most attorneys are going to want some sort of payment in advance called a retainer that would be applied toward the hourly fees as they're incurred. Retainers are all over the place, may depend a lot upon the experience of the attorney and the nature of the case. If somebody comes in and says, I want you to take over my case and handle a 5-day trial for me next month, you could expect the retainer would be very large as opposed to somebody coming in with a very routine case with a less experienced attorney, maybe a much smaller retainer. When I say smaller, I would say maybe $2,500 to $5,000 would be considered a small retainer. Average, I have no statistics, but just from what I see in my cases, I would say the average retainer for divorce these days is probably somewhere in the $6,000 to $12,000 range. If it's a complex case, then you'd expect probably it's going to be something much higher, maybe $20,000, $30,000, depending.
Wow. Okay. So I'm imagining what your initial consultation may be like. Does it go a little bit like this? we're going to have a very straightforward divorce, no real problem, other than my spouse is thinking of moving to Utah, and and I haven't been working for 2 years, but my spouse earns $250,000 a year. She is a neurosurgeon. So is it a little bit like that?
It can be. And people often are not good at determining the complexity of their case. Some people will come in and say, oh my gosh, I have the most difficult, complex case you've probably ever seen, and I'll evaluate it as being fairly routine. And other people will say that this is a routine case and not realize that it's very complex. So people often don't know and are not good at really deciding where their case is going to go. There's a tendency of people to want to think it's simpler than it is, a little bit of wishful thinking. And I usually say, I don't know until I get into it. Sometimes cases that appear to be simple become complex, maybe not because of the issues presented, but the personalities involved. Or cases that may appear to be very complex become relatively easy because there's a high level of cooperation between the parties and their attorneys.
Yeah, so that makes a big difference, I would think, is the personalities, and I mean, is this the person maybe that's set on revenge or whatever? The bastard's going to pay, or is it more of a cooperative? Let's keep peace as much as we can. So for one thing, because maybe we have children involved here, and they're going to be traumatized enough from having this change in their lives.
Yeah, I think there's sometimes a timing issue. Certainly when the breakup is very immediate and fresh, people are more likely to make poor decisions and make emotional decisions, and they both may feel wronged and might be more likely to get engaged in difficult, prolonged litigation, as opposed to people that have been separated for a time and have let we've worked through some of that emotion that everybody goes through when their marriage falls apart.
Okay. So should the agreement with the attorney be in writing?
Well, the law says that any time an attorney expects the fees are reasonably going to exceed $1,000, you must have a written fee agreement. And so that would apply to just about any family law case, has the potential of going over $1,000, and most of them would. Even the court filing fees are getting up there. They're still under $1,000, but you would find that every attorney is going to have a written fee agreement, and they do vary from attorney to attorney, whether they have arbitration clauses, whether they want to assert some sort of a lien. The hourly rates are certainly different. Their policies as far as replenishing retainers or the size of retainers, how expert witnesses might be paid. That's why I say it's not a bad idea to see multiple attorneys, get copies of their agreements, and read through them and understand them before you hire the attorney.
Darn, life seems so complicated enough just having to deal with the divorce. Now I've got to worry about what's my agreement with my attorney going to look like. Okay. So there are still some families around where one of the spouses is the principal breadwinner. And maybe even most families to some degree when both are working. But anyway, so is the breadwinner going to be the person who's going to have to pay all of these fees? Is that sort of a reasonable expectation? Where's this money going to come from?
I'll say that's a common expectation is a lot of folks assume that the other spouse is going to pay their attorney's fees. And that isn't necessarily the case. There are a lot of factors that can go into deciding who pays fees, and ultimately, if there's no agreement, the court has authority under certain circumstances to make attorney fee orders. Probably the main considerations are need and ability to pay. So certainly if you are the higher earner and you have a greater estate, a higher net worth in terms of your separate property, so you have a greater ability to pay, there's certainly a risk that you could be ordered to pay all or a portion of your spouse's fees. But it can be more complicated than that. The court also would look at the conduct of the parties in certain situations, so there can be fees based on bad conduct of one spouse that may create unnecessary fees. The law talks about fees that are reasonably necessary. So if someone creates issues that really shouldn't be there, chooses to go to court to fight losing battles, that spouse is at greater risk of contributing to the other spouse's fees.
Mm-hmm. So what if I'm in one of these situations that my spouse is the breadwinner and so forth, and I don't really have a lot of visible means of support. So now what do I do?
Well, the law says that the court has authority to make fees at the outset of the case, so you don't have to wait until it's over or wait until you get your spouse to agree. And it is very common that one spouse has locked up all the money essentially at the beginning of the divorce. So if somebody separates, they clear out the bank accounts, they start putting their paycheck in their own separate account, and the other person has no access to money. The policy of the law is that both parties should have equal access, so there's a level playing field. It would be unfair if one person was able to lock up all the money and hire the best attorney they could possibly find, and the other person's penniless and can't find representation. So the court can make orders for that spouse that has control to contribute to the other spouse's attorney's fees and costs, either from their separate property income or to give the other person access to their share of community property.
Okay. So we've gotten through most of our questions. So I guess what I'm going to do is draw a little bit on your experience here, and maybe you can talk a little about maybe some case studies or mistakes. We've only got about 5 minutes left, so we're okay. Just mistakes that you've seen that people have made when they're choosing an attorney or and so forth, sort of those little minor disasters or major disasters that have happened.
Sure. One thing I see is a lot of people will take the first referral they get, and for various reasons it wasn't the right attorney for them. They didn't do any shopping or any comparison. A number of times I've seen cases where people will go to an attorney from far out of the area. I remember one where somebody got a referral, and the attorney was down in Los Angeles.
And they were living in this area
and
in
the case
Northern
was
California.
in Santa Clara County.
Okay.
And it created some unnecessary expense, and then the attorney wasn't able to get up here on short notice. Sometimes we have what are called ex parte applications that requires a response to the court within 24 hours, and sometimes you're ordered to be in court on very short notice. So you can imagine if your attorney is in Southern California and something happens in your case that requires immediate action, could be very expensive. Are you going to fly them up here on a moment's notice? So I've seen that sort of situation where people really didn't think through some of the logistical issues. On that same subject, there certainly can be inside information. If you practice in a county, you really know how things are done in that county, and the rules do vary from county to county. Judges are different. You may not know that a particular judge in another county has some proclivities to make decisions in a certain way that might differ from another judge, and if you don't know that, you may be making a mistake letting your case go into that courtroom to the extent you have a choice of doing that. So I'd say staying in county is certainly something I think most lawyers would recommend unless your attorney has experience in the other county. I think it's important to pick an attorney that has at least the right amount of experience to deal with the complexity of your case. And I know there's a tendency of some people, they look for the cheapest attorney they can find, and thinking, maybe it's like buying a car that still has four wheels and will get me from here to there. But I guess it's a little bit different. I think of it as if I was looking for a heart surgeon, would I pick somebody out of the yellow pages just because they had the biggest ad? So I think you really need to spend some time trying to pick the right person.
It's like trying to pick Steve Rogers before or after he had the conversion to Captain America. Steve Rogers before was very brave and everything, and he would go up and he would get knocked down, and he wouldn't be a very good defender. But after he's Captain America, then he has the ability because he's had that transformation. And so the attorney that's been through a few battles and has an idea of how things work is going to be a lot better advocate for you.
Absolutely. And we see a lot of clients will change attorneys during the course of the case. Some people go through multiple attorneys from when they start their divorce until it's over, and that can add a lot of expense. So if you think you're going to be going to court, pick somebody that you know has courtroom experience, and a lot of attorneys don't, and some don't like to go to court.
Great. Mark, I want to thank you for joining me and sharing some of your insight about how to choose a good divorce lawyer. Folks, I hope we've given you some things to think about. This video will be posted on YouTube. You can find it at financialinsiderweekly.com under past episodes, so you can tell your friends that may unfortunately be dealing with a divorce. We'll see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.